Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming presented by Codename Entertainment. I'm one of your hosts, Treavor Bettis, and joining me each and every week is an amazing person who is...
Mitra Jordan. Woo. Okay, that feels really weird. I'm an amazing person called Mitra Jordan. Wow, I am outside of myself. Beside myself. Hi, I'm Mitra Jordan. I'm a registered clinical counselor working out of Victoria, BC. We try to do the show weekly. We apologize. I was ill last week, but I am ready to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and we're glad you're feeling better. Because the last thing, here's the thing. Again, this show is to talk about mental health and about being nice to yourself and caring for yourself and everything. I think doing this show while sick would be like the antithesis of what we're trying to get across on this show.
Well, pretty much, but I find that actually happens a lot in mental health. It's like, you're doing... Like when I did my master's, I had 3 young children, and the youngest was like 18 months. And I think, frankly, this is a bit of a recipe for like real. If you think about it, I didn't know I had ADHD, so I'm like,
yeah,
right. So that's
you were cooking with secret ingredients and you didn't even know it.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, today we're here to talk about when you need help. This is a topic that we've I believe we've done an episode on, but we've at least touched on, especially when it comes to seeking therapy, when it's time for therapy and stuff like that. But this we wanted to touch on it again because we've been doing the show for a while, which is still like we go back through the notes. We're like, this was 2 years ago. What do you mean this was 2 years ago?
Yeah, and I think we first, was it 21 when we started doing the show? I think it was 21.
January 2021.
So we're 3 years in. That's right. Yeah. So so the reason we're talking about this as well is because it's always good to review how to know when we need help. And I think we've also done variations where we've kind of talked about minimizing our own health or how to find a therapist. So there's definitely been very similar themes in previous shows, but in this one, we really want to talk about how to assess yourself and how to make sense of what's going on for you. Please understand, neither of us are doctors.
Me, absolutely not. I'm just some guy.
But, sometimes we may have an idea that, are things okay? And I think it's just really good to be able to examine that. And honestly, you can't go wrong making an appointment. If you have access to a GP, if you have access to therapy, it's a great idea, even if you're not sure what you're going to talk about. But if you haven't been quite feeling yourself, for instance, then it's a really good idea to just approach it instead of avoid it.
I've told people in my life, like, hey, even if you feel good and you feel like everything is going well, if you have the ability to, and just go, try it out and see what happens, because it's not a bad thing. And I think that is the thing that I'm so happy to see people move away from, because there was definitely the stigma a long time ago, like, oh, you need help, oh, you're so much less because you need to go seek help from a therapist or anything like that.
Eh,
I was watching.
If I'm laughing, it's because the Dr. B is
Oh,
in the chat and said, "We're never hypocrites in mental health." What?
absolutely not. No,
How
no.
are you still doing the show with us while not doing the show with us? Like, what the hell?
But
I'm
what
calling him out.
what I was gonna say though is, like, I was watching a documentary about I was actually watching a documentary about psychology in spaceflight, specifically about, like, where the proposed mission to Mars and what that would do on someone's psyche and everything like that. And, like, they were interviewing the first person to do, like, psych evals on astronauts, and essentially it was just like, I had to promise that I wouldn't name them, I'd delete all personal information from it, like, and I only got 10 people to talk to me out of the entire spaceflight crew. And so, like, there was very much the stigma against, like, oh, I won't talk to a therapist or a psychologist or anything like that. And
Yeah.
so the fact that we're moving away from that and are to a point where we're like, hey, take a look at yourself and, understand what you need to go through in that, and not having any judgment about it. I'm thrilled that we're to a point with that.
Absolutely. And yes, Dr. B, you would not be able to wash bottle parts and be on the show at the same time. So you have really managed to find a happy medium, my friend. So I think that is a really great question. If I'm unsure if there even is a problematic, or I don't know what it is, how do I even start that convo with the provider? Okay, so what we hope today is to answer at least part of that question. You'll tell us how we did at the end, I feel sure. So it's we're hoping to give you some tools to kind of make sense of what's happening currently in your life, perhaps what's changed, and how you can therefore approach talking to someone about it, how you can bring some concrete objective measures, if you will, to your own felt experience, which is not easy to do, right? So that's why it helps to have some external measures, as well as potentially other people in your life, we hope, who can help make those observations with you.
Yeah. Like,
Okay.
one of the sections that we have was, why are we talking about this like we normally have? We're already talking about that. But it's the going from the I'm sure this is fine to getting help that we need sort of thing.
Right. So one of the challenges we all experience in our lives is how things can get slowly worse over time, or more difficult over time. Or we can experience, and we did a whole episode on burnout, but where we can experience getting more and more tired or burnt out over time. And therefore, we continue to make little adjustments to cope with whatever challenging experience we're having. And we don't realize all those adjustments that we're making can take away from more enriching aspects of our life that are also helping to keep us going. By this, I mean, you know how, when you're going through something challenging, being able to cook yourself a good dinner pretty much goes out the window.
Yeah.
So let's look at 3 months or 6 months of not being able to take care of your health needs. Not good, right? So, but it often creeps up on us, and then we realize, oh, when was the last time I cooked myself a good meal? Or when was the last time I really thought about, maybe I've gotten into the habit of eating frozen convenience foods because that's super easy and quick, but now I'm not feeling as good, right?
Yeah.
But it happens over time. We do things in order to cope in the moment, and they can have longer term effects than we thought, because we're thinking about the next day or the next moment. We move into survival mode. So yeah, so let's talk about some of these things in more detail. As you say, sometimes it's hard to know when it's time, right?
Yeah.
Because there might also be long-standing challenges that we've had that we have normalized. I had ADHD for years before I realized I had ADHD.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, there's that is one of the other things. Like, there can be things that you don't know about yourself that you have normalized that may be actually inhibiting your ability to recognize that you need help in some way.
Right. And what is the difference between life stages that cause us to be challenged in positive ways, but are also difficult? How do we cope with those? I'm thinking of how Dr. B has had a baby. He mentions it right in the
Yeah,
chat. This is
baby
suddenly
B.
all about Dr. B over here. But you know what? Having a baby is absolutely wonderful, but it is also a life stressor, which can make it more challenging to do the self-care we need to be at our best. So how do we seek help through that time, right?
Hmm.
Some of us are more willing to ask for help than others, and that is kind of important, to get the help of your friends, your community, your family, instead of feeling like you have to cope yourself, which
Yeah.
is definitely on the burnout train, right?
Hmm.
So we're going to talk a little about that, not the baby so much as the changes. So shall we look at, we wanted to quickly overview invisible disabilities,
Yeah.
right? So as I said a minute ago, I had ADHD and didn't know it,
Hmm.
which meant I didn't know how much harder I had to work at certain things in my life,
Hmm.
which meant that my having to do that took away from better self-care at times, right? Now you can do that for a short while, but it becomes difficult over time. So invisible disabilities also include mental health challenges and illnesses that we just don't recognize are happening for us,
Hmm.
um, as well as long-term issues like ADHD, where we just don't, we've normalized that. Doesn't everyone have trouble being on time? I used to
Yeah.
think, you know, apparently not. Apparently, some people notice the passage of time, you know. It's shocker.
Wizardry. Wizardry.
Right? So I don't really, we've talked extensively about invisible disabilities before. But for instance, to broaden this out, hearing loss over time can be an invisible disability.
Hmm.
It's something my partner does deal with and is quite open about, but it's something you wouldn't know to see someone. You don't know how much harder they might be working, for instance, to lip read,
Hmm.
or how they may have misheard something you said. And they might be quite upset because they've misheard and thought you said something quite different than what you said. So these are things that if we understand about them, they're less of a stressor for the person and for ourselves. And they might be a reason to seek help depending on what's going on.
Hmm.
Um, Early stage depression and anxiety that we might have, we might not recognize it for what it is, or we may attribute it to something else.
Yeah.
And it's tough because sometimes it's attributable to other things. Like I'm having a tough time at work might be attributable to what's going on at work. But it might also be that my stress level for other reasons has been rising, or I'm having a harder time dealing with something. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we want to look at that. Burnout can definitely feel like an invisible disability. I wanted to recognize that.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I'll give the example I gave you before we started recording with this, of like recognizing it, because we were talking about specifically in the workplace sort of thing. There was an episode of the show a while back that after doing the show with you and Dr. B, I realized that had hit burnout. And that was because I had just, without even thinking, dropped an F-bomb. And like, we keep this show actually like pretty PG, like not even PG-13. And so the fact that I just, without even thinking, dropped that, it didn't care. That was a little signpost for me to be like, take a look at what's going on. I went, oh, I'm not good. Oh, I'm not good right now.
yeah.
I need to take some time away and like, get back to a better spot.
Yeah, and it's not that we don't occasionally and haven't sworn on the show,
Oh
but you're
yeah.
right. It was that bit where if it's one thing if you kind of notice it and go, oops, and then haha,
Yeah.
but
And
it's
I
another
didn't.
thing if it's like, yeah, yeah. And so just yeah, that's a really great that you picked up on that, because it's kind of one of those smaller things that we can really overlook, and also sometimes can get quite defensive if someone else points it out,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we'll get into irritation and things like that. So reasons we might need help, that we kind of sometimes think we have a roadmap to cope, so we don't actually seek help, might be major life changes. Um, so when there are positive life changes, we've mentioned having a baby, getting married, moving house to a nicer house, say, right? These are all positive life changes, but they do bring stress.
Yeah. None of those are easy.
No, and the thing is, we may think we have a roadmap, as in what you're supposed to do when you're in those situations. But it's not a road we've walked before. So it's partly that maybe there's a roadmap, but maybe it
Sorry, it was
doesn't really
Dr. B
work
again.
for us. I know, that's cute.
she's
Yeah.
pretty adorable. I miss sleep.
Definitely. Yeah. And when you miss sleep, lots of other things start to happen for you that
Yeah.
are pretty tough, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're not acknowledging them, or you're not sort of sleeping whenever you can, kind of thing, that makes it harder. So yeah. So of course, more obvious major life changes would be dealing with a bereavement, a level up in life responsibilities at work as well as in your personal life can be a big deal. I'm going to throw in international moves because I had to deal with 3 of these in my childhood.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, those are really tough.
I
You
like
know?
talk about a thing that I can't even imagine. Like I haven't even been outside of the country, let alone moved. And doing that as a child, man. Yeah. Can't even
And
fathom it.
especially when the reasons are separation and divorce in your family, or other losses, and I really, anybody who's emigrated as a child or as a teen, my heart goes out to you because that is tough. And there's a good chance, especially if it was considered to be a good move, as into a better country with more freedom or so on, that it was actually really hard to grieve that, to grieve the loss of your home, because people are busy trying to sort of celebrate and be in the honeymoon period and so on. So that's a huge shift in your life experience with a great deal of adjustment that's going to be required. So anytime we're dealing with a massive adjustment that interferes with sort of the developmental path we were on, whether as a kid or an adult, it's going to be difficult. Now, getting married and having children are considered a part of the developmental path. At the same time, they present challenges to what we were doing.
Yeah.
So basically, anytime you're in this situation of either something really positive that you have chosen, which I will admit is an easier life change to deal with, even if it's a tough life change. But if you're that kid who was emigrated, as in you weren't choosing it, it's going to be even more difficult than it was for the parent who chose it. Because once again, we don't really have a roadmap, and we're going to have to feel our way through. And we're doing something that, in the case of emigration or loss of life, or a death at an unexpected time, parents who lose a child, my heart is just melting for you as well, because those are really tough situations that we just didn't expect to have to deal with.
Yeah.
So all of these are a time to seek help, some of them more obvious than others, but it is important to get some support through them. So those are obviously really big categories.
Yeah.
And there are kinds of smaller, but still really significant experiences we may be having that lead us to at least suspect, or for others in our life to say, hey, you might need some help here.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the ways to assess help. So from a therapeutic helper, psychiatric point of view, we have something called a mental status exam, where we look at mood and its consistency, even in a short time, because sometimes people can move from being okay to being super irritable or upset or happy. And it's called emotional lability, is this sort of movement between a spectrum. We look at hygiene. Are you able to keep showering? What's happening in your life? So if I'm sitting in front of you trying to assess how you're doing, I'm going to look at, can you regulate in terms of your mood? Like, how's that going for you? How is your hygiene? And is it different than how it was? If you're like, I shower 4 times a week,
Yeah.
and that's fine. Okay, that's probably fine.
Yeah.
But if you're someone who's like, I used to shower every morning and now I'm having a lot of trouble with that, that for me is a flag that something is up for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Like I've told you that, like, but a shower in the morning, that's just like I've established that as a habit since, high school, and like that is just what I do. I wake up in the morning, I walk into the bathroom, and I take a shower. And yeah, I think if I ever hit a point where like I stopped doing that, like I think that would be a pretty quick red flag for me of like something is not right.
Yeah. So appearance, and this has to do with, in some ways it can be how put together you are, and this is subjective because I'm not going to judge how casually you're put together or not,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to judge on whether this is how you like to present. Are you comfortable? So are you congruently dressed, if you will? So if you're going to a job that requires you to be professional, are you able to put yourself together and do that? If you're wearing dress slacks to bed, I'm sort of wondering about that. Um,
God dang it. I know I put it in the notes, but still. Yeah, the one that I gave as an example
Cheers.
in a pretty thing was I didn't even connect this until this morning. That's how bad this is. I said, oh yeah, there's a long running joke in my friend group that for a stint of time I just slept in my jeans. Like I just was like, all right, it's time for bed, and I got into bed and I slept. And when Mitra was talking about this, I thought about it, I went, huh. That was kind of leading up to the time where I hit a peak of like anxiety and depression where like everything fell apart. Maybe that wasn't funny, and maybe that was just, ooh, okay.
It points to how connected you are with your environment,
Yeah.
first of all, depending on how you're presenting yourself out in the world, as well as how you're feeling about yourself and how connected you are to your body. So, and then there's movement. So sometimes when we're distressed, it's hard to sit still. Or sometimes we're physically exhausted and we have this very sort of very little energy. And I think, again, part of it is, how were you usually, like in the before times, and what's happening now?
Yeah.
And so it does relate to that. But sometimes when we are really jittery or really unsettled, that's something that's important to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is one that other people might remark on.
Yeah.
If you've always been the sort of person who paced or used your hands, don't worry about it. But if you suddenly find yourself much more agitated, and there are ways in which that agitation is showing up in your body, that is something to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So I know video game characters clearly have a problem. Why get into pajamas? Already in the chat. So let's talk then about other ways to assess. So we look at that. We're going to talk about food, mood, energy, and sleep.
Yeah.
So
well, you touched on this already with like the if you were in a state where you're cooking for yourself a lot and everything like that, and then you find that is happening less and less and less. I mean, I can totally relate to that of hitting a point where it's like, oh yeah, I don't cook anymore and I don't have the joy of it. And getting back into that felt so good. Like it like noting that and deciding to make that change. I mean, like, heck, tonight I'm gonna make dinner for my mom for her birthday. Like, and I'm looking forward to that act of cooking and everything. And that was something that was missing for years because I just was in a bad state and wasn't recognizing it when it came to that sort of thing.
Yeah. So food is really quite connected with all of the other ones. This is why we're talking about food, energy, mood, and sleep, because of the ways in which they kind of interact. So first of all, you might not be the sort of person who cares that much about cooking, but that is not the same as not caring about eating.
Yeah.
And it's also not the same as not caring about healthy eating. So when you're in a fairly capable and balanced state in your life, even if you're not much of a cook, you probably are giving some attention to what you're eating. We all have days where we're just like, oh God, just hand me the bread and cheese. I'm done. I just need something. Or, of course, if we have allergies and some challenges or have had to limit what we eat, we can certainly hit a wall there in terms of our interest or capacity to cope with that. No doubt. However, what I'm talking about is the food habits you had before or were trying to put in place in terms of good self-care, you're now not able to do, and it's been some considerable time since you have been able to. I get that there are periods in a person's life where we're just extra busy at work, or we're trying to launch something, or we're trying to get something done. We're probably eating less well, or maybe we're eating out more, but not in the good way. But it's a finite period.
Yeah.
If that finite period starts to extend into our new reality, yeah, maybe that's something to look at
Yeah.
in terms of our health, because that's going to affect mood, and it's going to affect sleep, and it certainly will affect energy levels. So, you mentioned feeling good, right? So one of the symptoms that we look at for depression, for instance, is anhedonia, or the lack of ability to really take pleasure in things that give us
Yeah.
pleasure before. So when we look at mood and the way we're interacting with our life, we really want to think about, did I used to enjoy this? Or I used to enjoy this thing, I'm trying to do it so I can feel good, and I'm not enjoying it.
Yeah.
Now, assess for, is it time, like, was I starting to get bored? And am I still enjoying the other things I enjoyed? Or is there a kind of global, if you will, lack of ability to enjoy things?
Yeah. Like essentially just kind of going through the day, like you're still doing the stuff that you normally did, but there's a level of enjoyment that you're just not getting. Like it's a blasé kind of thing. It's just like, yeah, no, I went to work, I got good feedback on my stuff, I played video games after work, I hung out with people. Like that sounds like a good day, but if you're at the end of it just going like, yeah, like
Yeah.
that's a difference. Yeah.
If the things that used to give you a positive charge aren't anymore, then that's something to look at. If there are still things in your life that give you a positive charge, and what's happening is things are shifting over for you, or if you've had a baby or some other positive thing with it taking more time in your life, it is very understandable that some of the things that you would do that perhaps were time consuming, you're not able to do.
Yeah.
But I'm going to assume that there's a great deal of joy and pleasure in that child. Otherwise, we might be looking at some postpartum issues in terms of your mental health, which again are worth looking into. So part of it is, how are we coping with big positive change? Because big positive change also brings changes in our own perception of ourselves and our ability to cope. So that's important to look at. And are we still enjoying things? Like, even if our life has changed, those things that we could do before we can't do, are we taking pleasure in the things that we can do? Are we able to manage our self-care? And if we've gone through bereavement or other challenges in terms of loss, are we able to ask for the support we need and be patient with ourselves? Because there's a very good chance we're not going to feel pleasure in the same things because we're processing a loss.
Yeah.
So don't expect it of yourself if you've gone through a great loss, or if you're coping with the roadmap or the life transition of divorce and separation. These are experiences that will take their course to process. And we know then that things aren't the same. But if all things equal, your life has continued as it did before, and you're able to take less pleasure in the things that you used to, that is certainly a yellow flag in my mind and worth looking into. So, we've got food, we've got mood. Let's look at energy levels. So how's our energy for tackling things that we have to do or that we want to do? Now, this relates to how much pleasure do I still get out of that ball game with friends or whatever, I'm doing the physical activity, or am I going out dancing if it's a thing I need? Am I still enjoying it? It certainly connects with that, but it also connects to usually when I come home from work, I would have energy and the work hasn't changed. Let's keep that in mind. And I just want to lie on the couch and I'm not doing anything. What else is going on in your life that it is causing that? Like, is there something else that you're dealing with? We talk about big loss, but what we haven't yet talked about is small ongoing losses. You were hoping to get a promotion, or your best friend is going through some major stuff, or your grandfather, yes, he was old, yes, you expected it, but his death is still going to be
Oh
hard,
yeah.
right? That can be a big loss. It can be a medium-sized one, depending. I don't, you know,
Loss is loss.
loss is loss,
Yeah.
right? The loss of a pet or
Mm,
unexpected expenses.
yeah.
If we have a number of things that sort of collide together that are challenges to our own sense of our capacity to cope, we can feel exhausted.
Yeah.
And our capacity to cope can be knocked off by any one of these things for at least a time. So just recognizing things that are challenges, if they're challenges for you, it doesn't matter if someone else seems to sail through them,
Oh man, yeah. The
right?
comparing yourself to other people, like, oh well, they this happened to them and they handled it fine. That's great. They're not you. That is a completely different person with completely different experiences, completely different brain chemistry than you.
Your subjective experience of something is really an important aspect of your energy level
Yeah.
and your mood. So let's talk about sleep, which can affect all of the above, right? I did say they were intertwined. There can be really good reasons for not getting enough sleep. uh,
The
Hi,
baby.
Dr. B. Hi. Hey, I see you. But there can, and of course, if there's things we're worried about or things we're processing or things that are tough in our lives, we're probably going to have issues with sleep. But all things being equal, and you notice that you're having trouble sleeping, there's a lot of reasons for trouble with sleep. Sometimes it can be pain, so physical pain.
Mm.
I'm not just emotional
Oh
pain,
yeah.
but
My
we
back
don't
problems are
always,
yeah.
right? And we can really minimize those and not realize when they start to affect other aspects of our life. And sometimes we're pretty good at ignoring physical pain through the course of a day, but then when we get to bed, we don't realize how much of an impact that pain is actually having on our body and our capacity to let go. I would hope that if we notice physical pain at night, now there certainly is pain that gets worse at night, better in the morning, that kind of thing. But I would hope we would also then start to look at concentration and mood and maybe examine what we're eating,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes what we're eating isn't agreeing with us and it may actually play into physical pain. So I'm no doctor, but I would just say once again, food, energy, mood, and sleep interact. If one of those things in your life isn't working, I would advise and support you looking into what's happening there for you.
Mm-hmm.
And try to honestly assess if there's a chance that this is affecting other aspects of your life too.
Yeah. Well, and to kind of like illustrate a situation where like, you know, just because I can understand that, the way that we're talking about this and whatnot, there can kind of almost develop a fear of like of analyzing because like, oh, if I analyze, I am gonna find something wrong. But like one of I told you this one earlier was that my wife and I have been staying up later. Like we go to bed now at like 11:30 or midnight, and we used to go to bed earlier than that. And I did at one point just do a self assessment of like, is something wrong here? Are we
Mm-hmm.
staying up later? Because something's not right. But no, like really, when I thought about it, I'm like, no, it's fine. We realize that we have the amount of sleep that we need. Have enough energy during the day, and it's nice having the extra time together. And so that was fine.
Yeah.
Now, if it was like, oh, even if it was as far as like 1 a.m. for us, like I think then I would be like, okay, I think something's up.
Yeah.
But and further into the night, yeah, definitely something. But it was a self-assessment that just turned out to be like, no, it's just a different change. It's fine.
Yeah, so sometimes people will withhold sleep from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an important one to talk about. And in the context of neurodiversity as well, a lot of people with ADHD do struggle with sleep. And people will struggle with sleep when they might be processing something that they're having a tough time sort of making sense of. And now making logical sense of something and experiencing your emotions aren't always related, as we know. So don't try to make logical sense of your mood. Just try to observe it. And generally when we're ruminating, perseverating, struggling in some way with our thoughts, or whether we're stuck on something, we might have trouble with sleep. And if we're having a sort of, there are mental health disorders that really, really impact sleep. Anxiety for sure. Neurological developmental issues like ADHD, or it's not an issue, disorder. I hate calling it a disorder because, frankly, it's my state of chaos and I am a child of the chaotic universe. But anyway, definitely will impact sleep and our recognition of our need to sleep. So if we were good at sleep and now we're having trouble with it, how connected are we feeling to our body? It comes to that. How much energy are we able to discharge during the day? Are we getting exercise? How we're doing? All of that interconnects. But sometimes if we are experiencing, maybe we have a mental health disorder, maybe we're struggling with bipolar disorder, right? Mania is usually going to impact your sleep a lot and your energy level a lot. So I'm just bringing that into the picture as if you notice that there's sort of hyper excitement or a desire to sort of focus in on one thing and it's affecting your sleep, you're staying up far too late going through some kind of rabbit hole around that. Let's see, around wanting to buy a lot of baking equipment all of a sudden when you have had very little interest in baking before this. That's kind of like what is going on, right? So often that can be a diversion from something that's really bothering you. Or it might be a symptom of developing or dealing with poorly managed, a known poorly managed disorder, as in your medication isn't working as well as it did. It can be a factor of that. There's something going on. It's really worth examining what that might be. So sleep issues are big. They relate to many different aspects of your health and not just your mental health. And if they're going sideways, it's important to look at. Withholding sleep from yourself when you're tired and you could go to sleep, but you seem to have trouble sleeping is considered a form of self-harm.
Yeah.
So just being willing to look at what's going on, I'm going to admit right now that I have sometimes stayed up far too late. Everyone, like anyone who knows me, will be rolling their eyes at this point. But sometimes, because if I don't have to get up early and if there doesn't have to be much organization in my life, there is definitely a part of me that just goes, woo, party! And just, so.
Like, I think with me, with staying up late and specifically like the ADHD, like, oh, I'm super into this thing. I think the most recent time I did this was when Elden Ring came out. And I was like, okay, that I'm taking the day off the next day. It launches at 9 p.m. on that Thursday. I am giving myself permission to play that game for as late as I want. But that's that one day, just that day.
Yeah. And I think that's great. I personally think that's a sign of mental health.
Yeah.
If you are doing something unusual or that could in some ways compromise your health at some other point in time, but you're like, no, this is a party and I'm going to have a couple more drinks than I normally would, or I'm going to stay up as late as I want, but you have planned for it and you have created a space to enjoy it, that is very different. That is a form of self-care. that is going, yeah, I'm going to create boundaries around this and safety around it. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not going to worry about it. I think that's great. What I want to see is that kind of attention to your life and to your needs. That's a sign of health. However, if you're kind of being reckless with your health, you know, and maybe somebody in your life has mentioned you want to cool it on the alcohol, whatever, substance you're enjoying, then that's perhaps important to look at.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to say if somebody really close to you is saying, hey, I'm worried about you, and enumerating the reasons why, I suggest that you listen.
Yeah.
And you can keep an open mind. And if you trust people and they're observing that they have concerns, then maybe you need help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the point of it being someone close to you, I think is a big thing, because it's like, if they feel the need to say something like that means that they have thought about it for a bit and have wanted to say something, and so that is I think is a good indication to, like, yeah, take a step back, look at it, assess yourself, sort of thing. Because I'm not going to speak for everyone, because there's people that are weird, sure, but, like, if someone took the time to say something, they care and they want to help you, but they can't do anything more than to bring it to your attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And think about how hard it is for people to address that with another adult.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, some of us have parents, some of us have siblings, some of us even have adult kids who might say something. It's still going to be emotional labor for them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They've taken the time to think about it and they're addressing something, and maybe it's scary for them. I'm going to say it was my son-in-law last summer who wondered about whether my, at that time, ADHD meds were working.
Mm.
And he had noticed, I think everyone had noticed, I was more irritated. I was less patient. But he was the one who said something about it. And I'm sure that took a great deal of courage, and I very much appreciate that he did.
Mm-hmm.
So even if I were to have come out of that thinking, no, there's something else going on, it's not the meds.
Yeah.
If your behavior has changed, and those in your life who you genuinely know have your interests at heart are pointing it out, especially if it's more than one person, or it's coming out in other spheres of your life. We're going to talk about the different areas of your life in a second. But if there's something that multiple people especially are noticing, then I think take heed.
Yeah.
That's really important information. We can get locked up in our own heads and our own minimizing and our own perception of okayness, but other people will notice the changes in us much quicker than we will notice. And friends and people who don't see us every day will also notice the changes in us, perhaps quicker than even a spouse will. Because, like the frog in boiling water situation, which I don't even know how true that is, but we all know the story, there are people who won't notice quite as much, and you won't notice yourself if there's a kind of long-term, over time, things have been getting worse and worse, versus someone who saw you 2 months ago and you were doing okay, and now they really notice that something's up. So pay attention to that too.
Yeah.
So let's talk.
Yeah, let's talk about the life categories that we got, because we're getting towards the end of the show here.
Oh yeah, we want to cover those. So overall, and you can 50 million life categories if you look anywhere on the internet, but I'm going to broadly say home, work, friends, and relationships. So are we able to meet the needs? Is home still feeling like a safe, happy place? Are we able to do the things that we need to do to maintain home? Are we able to do our tasks and, pay our bills and that kind of stuff? What's happening there? Work. Are we able to perform at work how we were before? I'm not going to count if you just got a promotion or, there's a new aspect of the job you're learning. I'm talking about the status quo baseline that you were doing. are you suddenly not able to do it? And is there not an obvious reason for it? I call bereavement an obvious reason, for
Yeah.
instance, or I call having a new baby an obvious reason, or moving house might be an obvious reason where we just have a little less attention for other aspects of our life. So what's happening at work? Are you okay? What's happening with your friends? Are you able to spend time with people that you care about or make time for the hobbies you share with them? Are you enjoying that time? Or are you finding that you have less and less time for friends? Or are you arguing with all your friends, or are you losing friends? There might be good reasons. If you, for instance, have tried to change a habit where you go to the bar every day after work, chances are you're losing friends if you're not going to do that, because perhaps a lot of your friends were involved in a hobby or activity that isn't the healthiest for you, and you're trying to change, right?
Yeah.
But in general, if you have good and trusted people in your life, or you did, and you haven't moved 3,000 miles away, which these days we've got the internet and we can chat with people, but are you losing friends and nothing else in your life has changed? So, relationship, how are things with your partner? There might be good reasons why things aren't going well. You might be going through a separation, right? Or you might have hit a wall, relationally speaking, where there's something big you have to deal with. Or your partner's dealing with something in their personal life, as in maybe their extended family or maybe their work. That's okay if that's the case. But all things being equal, nothing's changed. You're losing patience. Maybe you aren't able to manage your executive function. Maybe you're not as regulated. What's happening there? So those, I would say, are the big ones to look at.
Um,
Yeah.
I was fully planning on not because we don't have a lot of time for questions. However, I do think Dr. B did just put in a great question here to cap things off. How do we know how worth it change can be?
That's a very good question, especially if we've been struggling for a long time.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I can give you my answer for recently, because this episode hit close to home for me for timing, because I did hit this point where I essentially was like, I don't like how I'm feeling, I don't like how things are going, and I want to change. And the idea of not being in that place of changing how things were around me in my head and everything like that, I felt relief just thinking about that.
and
And
so
yeah,
that's hope,
yeah,
right? And that's a really important piece of change. If we're assessing, could it be worth it to change? We need to, and this is where I think therapy is super helpful, because, or even just talking to a good friend who can sort of say, in the before times, things were like this.
yeah,
And there are aspects of that that you can reignite in your life now, or there can be medication, there can be therapy, there can be, hey, I'll be your exercise buddy, why don't we make some meals together, right? All of those things can help us feel not alone and help us feel, more important, a sense of hope. This can be different.
yeah,
I think that's the most important thing. And then working with a therapist or talking through good friends, what do I need to be different? What do I want to change? And then a path to working out
yeah.
what to do next.
I mean,
So,
I literally took out a notebook and sheet of paper and wrote down like what I wanted to change in the way that I at that moment saw the ability to do it. So
yeah,
I
when we
highly recommend it.
yeah, I think being able to sort of visualize that and have some concrete things I want to do. I want to come out of this having a little more energy. I want to come out of this being able to appreciate my family. And how do I quantify that? I want to spend more time with them. I want to do things with them. I miss playing board games with them. I miss being able to go for a walk. What am I missing, and how can I put it back in my life? And if I'm dealing with, a broader health issue, what are the steps?
Yeah,
So, yeah, you don't have to do it alone, whatever you're dealing with.
that part right
That's,
there.
yeah.
All right, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Mitra, if people want to find you and what you do on the interwebs, where can they do so?
They can find me at the site that rhymes with bitter, which absolutely quantifies my emotions around it. At Mitra Jordan.
I like that. I like that. All right.
And also mitrajordan.com.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks for being with us again, Dr. B, as well. We do so enjoy your company.
The currently hidden third panelist, yes.
Totally.
Yeah. Apologies for folks that we didn't get to questions of. Some of the questions I saw, we always do recommend takethis.org as a good spot to start for looking for places to help. But that's just like we said, a start. You can find me on the social medias at the Treavor. There's an A hiding in there. We'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, take care of yourself.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.